Have you ever noticed how loud life can be, even when everything is quiet? You sit down at the end of the day. The house is still, but inside you, 1,000 thoughts move. The undone, the unsaid, the unknown. And somewhere in the middle of it all, a quiet voice whispers, "Let it be." Not as an answer, not as a way to fix anything, but as an invitation to stop fighting what is. In those three simple words lies a doorway, not to escape, but to return, not to do more, but to be here now. And behind that doorway, a silence, a stillness, a kind of peace that doesn't ask you to change, just to come home. When life grows loud and heavy, we often seek answers. We scroll endlessly, read articles, chase after advice. But sometimes healing doesn't begin with another piece of information. Sometimes it begins with that whisper, soft, almost imperceptible, "Let it be." These words, made timeless by the Beatles, have transcended melody to become a quiet refuge for millions. They carry no command, no urgency, just presence, just permission to stop resisting. Let it be is not about giving up. It's not passive or apathetic. It's a door, a threshold we rarely notice, because it doesn't call for attention, but for stillness. It doesn't ask us to run toward answers, but to stop running from what is. And behind that stillness is something the mind rarely allows us to touch: peace. In Buddhist tradition, true peace isn't the absence of problems, it's the absence of resistance to them. This isn't an idea reserved for monasteries or meditation cushions. It's for anyone who has ever clenched their fists in frustration, cried over things they couldn't fix, or laid awake replaying conversations that ended long ago. In a world that constantly urges us to act, fix, change, improve, there is wisdom in just being, just breathing. This doorway into stillness isn't exotic. It doesn't require robes, rituals, or retreats. It could be the moment you decide not to send that text out of anger, the breath you take before reacting, the cup of tea you drink while watching the steam rise, doing nothing else. These are tiny rebellions in a world obsessed with noise. They are acts of radical stillness. Let it be is not a solution. It is the space in which solutions can emerge. It is not a teaching. It is the silence that allows the teaching to arise. And when we enter that space, even for a moment, we're no longer trapped in the storm. We become the sky. The Buddha spoke of suffering, of craving, of impermanence, not to discourage us, but to invite us to let go of our illusions and come home to what's real. And what is most real? This moment, this breath, this now. That's where stillness lives, not in perfection, but in presence. So before we explore suffering, impermanence, or mindfulness, before we speak of anything that requires change, let us first pause. Let us learn to stop fixing, stop chasing, and just let it be. From that place, a different kind of strength arises, not from control, but from surrender, not from knowing, but from resting in the unknown. This is the first step, not forward, but inward, a quiet beginning to a different kind of journey, one that does not ask us to climb higher, run faster, or be more, but simply to be here, now. And in that stillness, everything shifts. The root of suffering. Suffering doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers in the quiet moments between responsibilities, in the silence after an argument, in the pause between dreams and reality. It takes many forms: restlessness, dissatisfaction, loneliness. But underneath them all lies a common thread: resistance. Resistance to what is, to what was, or to what might never be. And yet, even in our deepest discomfort, we rarely pause to ask, why am I really suffering? The Buddha, over 2,500 years ago, offered a startling answer. We suffer not simply because life is hard, but because of how we relate to it. He didn't promise a life without pain, but he showed us how to understand the nature of pain and transform our relationship to it. According to the Four Noble Truths, suffering exists, not as punishment or failure, but as a reality of human life. But more importantly, he taught that suffering has a cause. That cause is craving, clinging, a refusal to accept the impermanence of things. We grasp at people, outcomes, identities, as if they were solid. We cling to the past, fearing it will fade. We obsess over the future, terrified it won't arrive as we planned. We build lives around expectations, then break when those expectations are unmet. What hurts most is not what happens, but how tightly we hold on to how we believe life should be. Think about it. We don't suffer because love ends. We suffer because we believed it never would. We don't suffer just because someone leaves. We suffer because we thought they belonged to us. We suffer not only from failure, but from the story we told ourselves about what success would mean. Our attachments, innocent as they may seem, are what create the friction against reality. The tighter we hold, the more it burns. But this teaching isn't meant to shame us. It's meant to liberate us. Buddhism does not ask us to stop loving, or dreaming, or hoping. It asks us to look closely at the nature of our holding. Are we clinging from fear or connecting from presence? Are we trying to control life or flow with it? The invitation is not to feel less, but to suffer less. Not to detach from life, but to soften our grip on what we cannot hold. Modern psychology echoes this ancient truth. Psychologists like Carl Jung and Tara Brach speak of the suffering that arises when we resist what is. Jung said, "What you resist persists." Tara calls it the trance of unworthiness, a cycle of grasping and self-judgment that deepens pain. And so, the teachings of the Buddha find new language in our time, but the root remains the same. We suffer because we want life to be different than it is. And so we fight. Not just others, but reality itself. We fight change, we fight loss, we fight uncertainty. But life, in its quiet way, continues to change, continues to move. It does not punish us, it simply is. The suffering comes not from what life brings, but from our refusal to receive it. To let go of suffering, we don't need to reject life. We simply need to stop resisting it. This doesn't mean we become indifferent. It means we become intimate with reality as it is. It means noticing the pain without becoming the pain, feeling the fear without obeying it. It means learning to say, "Yes, this hurts, but I don't need to make it hurt more." When we see suffering clearly, not as a failure, but as a teacher, we begin to unlearn the patterns that keep us trapped. We stop asking, "Why me?" and start asking, "What is this showing me?" And in that shift, something opens. Not a solution, not immediate relief, but space. Space to breathe, to soften, to be. This is the root of suffering, not life itself, but our grasping for it to be other than it is. And once we see this clearly, we're no longer at war with the world. We're no longer at war with ourselves. Impermanence, the flow of all things. There's something beautifully cruel and tender about time. It never stops moving. The seasons shift without permission. Faces grow older in the mirror. A child's laughter becomes a memory before we realize it was a moment. And no matter how tightly we try to hold on, everything we love is already changing, already becoming something else. We know this somewhere deep inside, but we live like we've forgotten. We try to freeze what's fluid. We try to build permanence in a world made of waves. Impermanence is not a tragic truth, it's just a truth. Everything that begins will end. Every wave will return to the sea. Every breath we take comes with the knowledge that there will be a last one. And yet, we often live as if we are surprised when things change. We grieve not only because something ended, but because we believed, even unconsciously, that it wouldn't. Buddhism teaches that impermanence, anicca, is not just a philosophical idea. It is the very nature of all existence. To fight impermanence is to fight reality itself. And yet, most of us do. We hold on to relationships long after they've become unkind. We resist aging, mourn our youth, and inject ourselves with denial. We keep rereading the chapters of our lives we wish hadn't ended, hoping the story will change. But it won't. And that's not a tragedy. That's what makes the story beautiful. If everything were permanent, nothing would be meaningful. A sunset is precious precisely because it fades. A song moves us because it ends. We hold someone a little tighter, not because we can keep them forever, but because we know we can't. The truth of impermanence is not something to fear, it is something to bow to. It invites us to be present, not in spite of change, but because of it. When we embrace impermanence, we stop waiting for the perfect moment and start inhabiting the one we're in. We stop trying to make things last forever and start loving them while they're here. And slowly, our fear of change becomes reverence for life as it actually is. Unpredictable, uncontrollable, breathtakingly brief. Modern culture tells us that stability is success, that the goal is to lock things down, secure everything, and prevent surprise. But this is not life. Life is motion. Life is mess. Life is a tide that comes and goes no matter how tightly we try to dam the flow. The pain comes not from change, but from our expectation that things shouldn't change. Impermanence teaches us that no feeling, no failure, no loss is forever. It also means that no joy, no success, no love can be held in our hands for long. But this doesn't make life empty. It makes life sacred. The moment we stop trying to make life permanent is the moment we begin to participate in it fully. We don't just watch the river, we become part of the river. So what do we do when something we love begins to slip away? What do we do when the job ends, the relationship changes, the version of ourselves we once knew begins to dissolve? We grieve, yes, but we also breathe. We soften. We stop trying to preserve and start trying to be present. And in that presence, we find something astonishing. Peace not in holding, but in flowing. Letting go is not forgetting. Letting go is remembering. Differently, it is saying thank you instead of why. It is allowing what was to have mattered without needing it to last forever. That is the quiet power of impermanence. And when we learn to live in rhythm with it, not against it, we begin to understand what freedom truly feels like. Loving without chains. Love is one of the most beautiful things we can feel, and also, sometimes, one of the most painful. We long to love deeply, fully, without fear, but often, love becomes tangled in expectation, control, and the quiet terror of loss. We don't mean for it to happen. We start with open hands, but somewhere along the way, our fingers curl into fists. We begin to grip, to define, to possess. And what once felt free starts to feel fragile. Most of us were never taught how to love without holding tight. We were taught to protect what we love, to fight for it, to keep it close. But rarely were we shown how to love in a way that doesn't cling. Buddhism offers us something both radical and deeply human, a love rooted not in attachment, but in presence, not in ownership, but in appreciation, not in fear, but in freedom. To love someone without chains is to let them be fully themselves, even if that means changing, even if that means leaving, even if that means no longer needing us. That kind of love is not less, it's more. It's love that doesn't depend on control. It's love that says, I see you, I honor your path, even when it diverges from mine. It's the kind of love that nourishes rather than consumes. But this isn't easy. We've been conditioned to believe that love means holding on. We measure commitment by proximity and security by sameness. When someone we love begins to shift, grows distant, grows different, we panic. We try to pull them back into the shape we remember. But people are not memories. They're rivers. And the moment we try to dam that river, we lose its beauty. To love with open hands means we risk getting hurt. but we're already hurting when we try to hold too tightly. When we grip, we create tension. When we expect, we create disappointment. And when we demand, we create resistance. In trying to prevent heartbreak, we often create it. The Buddha taught that attachment, not love, is the root of suffering. Love, in its purest form, is spacious. It allows. It does not bind. It doesn't mean we stop caring. It means we care more deeply because we're not trying to make love serve our fear. We're letting it be what it is, alive, flowing, temporary, and real. Imagine holding a bird in your hand. If you close your fist, it will struggle. If you open your palm, it may fly, or it may stay. But either way, it is free. And love that is free has the space to grow. Sometimes, that growth means letting go. Sometimes, it means staying close but not controlling. And sometimes, it means loving someone from afar, with nothing but quiet blessing in your heart. In Western culture, love is often painted as possession. You're mine. I can't live without you. We complete each other. These ideas are romantic, but they're also prisons. Because no one can complete us. And love that depends on permanence is love that fears impermanence. But we've already seen the truth. Everything changes. And so must love. But that doesn't make love less powerful. It makes it more real. It invites us to be present with each other, not because we're guaranteed a forever, but because we know we're not. It invites us to say, I love you, not to possess, but to witness. And in witnessing, we find something that looks a lot like peace. To love without chains is not to love less. It is to love with trust. Trust in the other person's path. Trust in our own capacity to love without needing to own. Trust in life to unfold, even if it's different than we imagined. And maybe most importantly, trust that letting go is not the end of love. It might be the beginning of its purest form. Slowing down into presence. Somewhere along the way, we started believing that moving faster meant living better. We wake up and check our phones before our feet touch the floor. We reply to emails while eating breakfast. We plan our next move before we've even finished this one. In a world that worships productivity, stillness feels like failure. But somewhere deep inside us, something whispers otherwise, something tired, something sacred, a voice that says, slow down, you're missing your life. Presence isn't about doing nothing. It's about being here for what's actually happening. And the truth is, most of us aren't. We rush from task to task, distracted not just by screens, but by our own thoughts, regrets of the past, anxieties about the future. We live not in the moment, but in the timeline. And the cost isn't just stress. It's life itself. The Buddha taught that presence, sati, or mindfulness, is the foundation of awakening. But not as a technique, not as a trick to be more efficient, as a way of seeing, a way of being. To slow down is not to be lazy. It is to resist the cultural pressure to always be more, to always be somewhere else. Slowness is not weakness. It is courage in a world that fears pause. We often believe we don't have time to slow down, that the world will fall apart if we step off the treadmill for even a moment. But what if it's the rushing that's making life fall apart? What if everything we're chasing, peace, clarity, connection, isn't ahead of us, but already here, just waiting for us to arrive? Slowing down is not just about movement. It's about intention. You can walk quickly and still be present. You can speak softly and still be distant. Presence begins not with pace, but with attention. Where is your mind? Where is your heart? Are you in the same place as your body? To live slowly is to notice, to feel the warmth of your coffee, to look someone in the eyes and actually see them, to hear the sound of your own breath and not try to change it, to eat without rushing, speak without rehearsing, listen without waiting to respond. These small moments are not filler. They are the fabric of life, and they're only available when we stop hurrying past them. In slowing down, we begin to hear the subtle voice of life again, the rustling of leaves, the pause between words, the silence beneath sound. And in that silence, something shifts. We remember that we are not machines, that we were not made to function endlessly, but to feel, to experience, to rest. We remember that it is okay not to rush healing, not to rush love, not to rush life. The most meaningful moments rarely shout. They whisper, and we only hear them when we've made enough space. Slowing down is how we make that space, not by escaping life, but by finally entering it. Returning to the here and now. We spend so much of our lives anywhere but here. Our bodies walk into rooms while our minds replay old conversations. We brush our teeth thinking about tomorrow's meeting. We talk to someone while checking our phones. We eat, but we don't taste. We breathe, but we don't feel it. It's as if we're always one step ahead or two steps behind, and rarely standing where our feet actually are. And yet, this moment, this breath, this heartbeat, this sip of tea, is the only place life is truly happening. The past is a memory. The future is a guess. The present is all we ever really have. But the present requires something of us. It asks us to arrive, not just with our bodies, but with our full attention. It asks us to be willing to feel, to listen, to soften. The practice of returning to the present isn't about becoming perfect. It's not about having a mind that never wanders. It's about noticing when we've left and gently coming back, again and again, with kindness, not judgment, with curiosity, not control, like returning home, not forcing a task. Mindfulness, in its essence, is this return, not as a performance, not as something to master, but as an act of love. Each time we come back to now, we're choosing life over habit. We're choosing presence over projection. And that choice, repeated over time, changes the very texture of how we live. It's easy to miss the power of the present moment because it rarely demands anything. It doesn't ring or vibrate. It doesn't shout like a notification. But if we pay attention, it sings. In the warmth of a cup in our hands, in the softness of someone's voice, in the light shifting on the floor, there is a quiet richness available to us when we're here, fully here. To return to the present doesn't mean we forget the past or ignore the future. It means we stop using them as places to escape. We learn to let the past inform us without imprisoning us. We let the future guide us without controlling us. We root ourselves where life actually unfolds. And in that grounding, we find a kind of freedom that isn't flashy, but enduring. Even in pain, the present moment holds something sacred. We may not like what is happening, but when we meet it fully, we're no longer fighting shadows. We're no longer trapped in imagined disasters. We're with what's real. And in that realness, even suffering becomes less sharp because it's no longer layered with resistance. The phrase "let it be" is not a passive resignation. It is an active return, a decision to be with what is, rather than what was or what should be. And the beauty is, we don't have to wait for peace to arrive in the future. It's already here, hidden in the simplicity of this breath, this gaze, this heartbeat. We just have to return. Letting go, letting life. Letting go is not a single act. It's not a moment when everything falls away and we suddenly feel light and free. It's a quiet, ongoing process, a softening, a loosening, a daily choice to stop holding so tightly. We let go not because we no longer care, but because we finally see that holding on was never the way to peace. We let go not to escape life, but to allow it to finally enter us. Life was never meant to be gripped. We are taught to chase, to cling, to define ourselves by what we accumulate and control. But the truth is, everything we've ever tried to hold, people, moments, identities, was already moving, already becoming something else. And we can spend our lives trying to keep everything from changing, or we can open our hands and learn to live in the flow. Letting go doesn't mean we lose everything. It means we stop trying to possess what was never ours to begin with. It means trusting that what falls away is not a punishment, but a kind of grace. That what remains is what was meant to stay. And what leaves creates space for breath, for becoming, for peace. So much of our suffering comes not from what's happening, but from our resistance to it. We hold on to old stories, old expectations, old versions of ourselves. We try to rewrite the past. We try to script the future. And in the process, we miss the only place where life is actually alive. Now, letting go is a return to now. It is the release of the illusion that we can control what was never meant to be controlled. The beauty is, we don't have to let go all at once. We don't have to become unshakable or untouched. We just begin, one breath at a time, one choice at a time. We notice where we're clinging and we soften. We see the fear and we don't obey it. We feel the ache of loss and we don't let it harden us. We let go, not to become less human, but to become more whole. Letting go is not giving up. It's showing up without armor. It's saying yes to what is, even when it's messy or painful or uncertain. It's loving what's here while it's here and letting it move when it's time to move. It's trusting the intelligence of life, the way a river carves its path, not by force, but by flowing. In the end, letting go is not about detachment. It's about intimacy. When we stop trying to control life, we start to feel it more deeply. When we stop gripping, we start receiving. When we let go, we don't float away. We fall into something real, something grounded, something alive. There will still be grief. There will still be longing. But there will also be space. Space for what's next. Space for what's true. Space for life. Not as we imagine it, but as it actually is. And in that space, we discover something both simple and sacred. That peace was never in the holding. It was always in the letting go. And if something in these words has touched a quiet place within you, know that you are not alone. We're all learning, slowly, imperfectly, to live more lightly and more deeply. Sometimes, just hearing that you don't have to hold everything anymore is enough to begin. This channel was created as a space to breathe, to reflect, to remember what really matters beneath the noise. If this message resonates with you, we invite you to walk with us by subscribing, sharing this with someone who may need it, or exploring other reflections we've created with care. Every view, every comment, every quiet moment you spend here, it matters. Thank you for being here, for listening, for being willing to soften. And until our paths cross again, let it be.